We are live in the Asiatech podcast studio. Graham Brown, joined by Lindy Ledohowski. Did I get that right?
You sure did.
Ruben Balasubramanian.
That's right, pretty much. Balasubramaniam.
Maniam.
Yes.
All right. Apologies.
No worries.
I'm doing my best here. These are very long names. Well, great to have you here. Co-founders of EssayJack. We're going to talk about your journey in the startup world, and not just journey in the startup world, but you've come from Canada to here through Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia as well. So you're a Canadian company.
That's correct.
You have operations in Malaysia.
Yep.
You're here today in Singapore on your tour, your world domination tour. So we're going to talk about that as well as what you're doing in the space of EssayJack as well. Maybe we can talk a little bit about what EssayJack is, put that on the table first, and then we'll sort of wind back as to, you know, why are you in this space in the first place? So a bit about your background and, you know, how you got into that space.
I was going to say, who wants to start?
Who's going to speak?
I suggest you start. You're the
Lindy.
CEO.
Yep.
Lindy as the CEO.
All
What
right.
is EssayJack?
Yeah, so put simply, EssayJack is an essay structuring tool. So it's an online platform that structures English language writing in any genre. So we've started in the education space. That's why EssayJack, we're focusing on essays. I used to be an English professor, so I have written my fair share of
You've
essays.
seen your fair share as well.
I have marked my fair share of essays.
More
and written
importantly.
my fair share. So that's sort of where it got started. I mean, you can jump in with a little bit more.
You're both professors.
That's correct. I'm a professor of law and philosophy.
Right. Okay, so how many essays have you sat across the table from in your life?
Let's just say simply, we've done our 10,000 hours.
10,000 hours, yeah. That's
each,
more,
and then some. You know.
that's one per essay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's important. If we can jump into the pitch deck here, we're going to have a look at your EssayJack pitch deck. I think it's important to start with the problem.
Yeah.
So you've identified it straight off the bat, which is students cannot write.
Yep. And you know what? They're not alone. So we've really focused on the students can't write.
Right.
But many of us
I think
can't
so, yeah.
write. You know, it's quite a global problem. I mean, I think the statistics are something like U.S. businesses spend $3.2 billion a year on writing remediation for people who already have jobs. Like that's
writing remediation?
Yes,
Is that a thing?
Yes. Oh, it's an expensive thing.
Is that like courses, like professional development?
Yeah, so it's where you basically bring in like a consultant and say, oh, I'll pay you a whole bunch of money to come and teach my staff how to write documents.
There are writing consultants, for example, in Toronto working with junior lawyers who bill as much as the lawyers do, $400 an hour.
Wow.
To help those lawyers
what school should have done.
documents.
Yeah.
All right, so where's the fundamental problem? And I completely agree with you because I consider myself a writer in some aspects of what I've done. I've written books. And I find it quite frustrating that, you know, people think they can write because they've been to university and they wrote a 10,000 word essay, therefore they're qualified to write. And when you actually have to sit and read their writing, it's quite a challenge. I've only read a few. I mean, I haven't done 10,000 hours like you done. So let's talk about it. Why can't people write? What is it? Is it they're not trained? Is it something missing? What's the issue here?
Well, I think I can jump in on this one. I mean, so at one level, the problem might be where people lack basic linguistic capacity, English language learners. But the problem we're interested in, which is the big general problem, is that people have no trouble deriving content or getting access to information. Their difficulty lies in systematically and clearly communicating it in a written format so that someone else can understand it.
Right, so the issue is there's too much out there.
It's structuring and organization.
Yeah, so this is one of those things, and I'll jump in here. So, you know, back in ye olden days when I learned how to write, I like literally learned how to write with my hand and pen and, you know, wrote a draft first and then I would go and sort of type it up. And of course that's now lost. So people first go to whether it's typing or you know, sort of texting, and then you have ultimately a blank screen, which seems to require something that's finalized, and all of that sort of messy pre-work is now gone. And so what's missing with that messy pre-work is that's often how you organize your thoughts, how you structure your thoughts. And so what EssayJack is saying is, okay, well, we've now digitized that experience with the benefit of our expertise for what constitutes genre-specific writing. So if you're writing a short story, here are the component parts. If you're writing an essay, here are the component parts. If you're writing, you know, if you are preparing a persuasive speech, here are the component parts. You know, so that some of the technologies out there do a really good job once you've written something. So you can spell check and you can grammar check,
Yeah.
and there's now, autocomplete. If I've got half of a sentence written, I might get a suggestion for the rest of the sentence. But when I'm staring at that blank something, whether it's a text box or a blank Microsoft Word page, it's just blank and there's nothing to help. And EssayJack is sort of marching boldly into that empty space.
Right. That empty space, you said that sort of messy pre-work, the heavy lifting that goes in to create the essay. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that's key, isn't it?
Yeah.
As I understand what you're saying is that now we have access to all this information.
That's right.
What tends to be the knee-jerk reaction to writing an essay is just gather the information, dump it onto a document, and then sort of cut and paste what I can get away with, submit it to the professor, right? So whereas before, because we actually had to write this stuff and it was a lot of work, there was a cost involved in writing it physically or tapping away on the typewriter. Therefore, we thought twice about just kind of dumping everything there. We had to actually think about organizing it first. So let's talk a little bit about that messy pre-work. What exactly is that? What is that skill that's kind of missing?
Well, I think one of the major difficulties at the level of pre-work is people don't take good notes anymore because access to information is easy. Whereas previously I'd have to go to a library, do some research to find relevant sources, read articles, and take notes by hand. As I'm doing that, I'm internalizing structure. As I'm doing that, I'm already starting to organize the relative relevance of the information that I am now accessing. I no longer need to do that. I could just go onto Google.
Right.
Of course, that's a different problem we can talk about. You can go onto Google and do a search. You might find all these sources, but you might not still be able to rank them effectively. But the point is, because you no longer need to really take notes, it's cut and paste. You're not actually learning the rules. This creates a problem when it comes to writing.
Right. So the actual process of taking notes is actually helping you create structure.
Yes, it is.
Before you actually create
You have to read more closely.
Yeah.
You have to synthesize and distill. And as you do that, you're already learning structure.
Well, and I think too, and I'll jump in here as well, just from a technological perspective, and by all means, I'm not anti-tech. I mean, I'm the CEO of a tech company, so I'm not anti-tech, but at the same time, technology breeds certain kinds of pathologies when it comes to writing. So to go back to how easy it is to acquire content, I can Google search anything and get a lot of information, a lot of data, and then I can just sort of quickly copy and paste that into a document without ingesting and deciding, okay, what actually needs to be there, what's nice to have, what's interesting, what's relevant. Whereas, again, back in the olden days, I would hear somebody lecturing, I would take notes on what they were saying, or I'd, in Ruben's example, I'd go to the library and I'd be making all kinds of decisions at every step along the way about what what content was valuable to bring to bear. Whereas now you don't really have to make those decisions anymore. And so as a result, you are, as you very rightly described, what is essentially a kind of content dump on the page, and then you hit indent a couple times to indicate that's a new paragraph.
Right.
And that's
change a few of the words to get it through the copyscape, right? So students how to do this now. All right, well, let's sort of dive into this a little bit. I'm really fascinated by how you actually solve this. So we'll look at the solution. Maybe we can have a look at some of the data as well. You've got some data in your very extensive pitch deck. I want to jump forward here. Now, if you are listening only to the audio version of this, we may have to be a bit descriptive with our data here. So how proficient are students? This is the data to back this up. What are we looking at here? So we've got a comparison, grade 8 and grade 12 students in the US. So what age would they be? Grade 8 would be 13.
So grade 8 is about 13, and grade 12, they're just getting ready for college and university.
You're right,
so
okay.
17, 18.
They should be able to write at this stage, especially grade 12, right? Okay, fair enough. Put it out there. So explain to me the colors here. Can you maybe describe to people who can't actually see this, what this data is showing? And this is from the US Department of Education, so it's pretty cohesive.
Yeah,
right?
So this is, and this is just sort of one of the data points, but there's a lot. So this U.S. Department of Education statistic that Graham's talking about indicates that over 70% of American students at both of these grade levels, grade 8 and grade 12, are functioning at the basic or below basic level. So it's only 24% for both, and 3% at the top end that are proficient or advanced writers. And so really you're looking at a large number of students really functioning below the proficiency level. And there are lots of complicated reasons for that. Some of it is the dynamics of contemporary classrooms, where There's grade inflation, there's budgetary constraints which limit what educators can do. So I mean, we mentioned at the start that I was a professor, but prior to that I was a high school English teacher as well. So I've seen both sides, and so I'm loath to be one of those professors to say, oh my gosh, it's just what's happening at high school, it's terrible.
Right.
I think it's far more complicated. I think the global movement of students from various different educational jurisdictions doesn't create the same kind of continuity of an educational process that you once had. And so there are certain things that you can't necessarily rely that are being taught at various different stages along the way. And all of this has kind of gone together to create quite a difficult and complicated situation where students aren't necessarily getting the skills necessary to be successful later on. And so by the time they get to college or university, they don't have that foundation. And if you have students in your class for 12 weeks, that's the length of a semester at college or university. If they don't already have that foundation, it's like showing up to first year calculus and you don't know how to add and subtract. It's not going to happen.
So then you encounter a professor like myself, typically, so the statistics here don't actually show the skill levels, writing levels at university, but when students come to university, if they don't have the skills, they have to pick it up on the street, as it were.
Right, yeah.
A university professor is not going to teach them how to write most of the time, because professors don't have the knowledge to teach you writing skills. They all know how to write in their disciplines, but I'm a content area expert.
Right, it's a domain knowledge you're teaching them, right?
Yeah, so you've got to figure it out, and if you can't, you've got a problem.
You get left behind.
And so there's a huge gap.
Why is it a problem then? I want to bat it back to you. Why is lack of writing, and if we look at the data back there, that 70%, so 70% have a problem because they're not proficient. Why is that a problem? We live in a world now where, if I want to communicate, I can just pick this thing up and send you a text message or WhatsApp. So why is it a problem?
So there are two sort of really key areas, and they are crucial in my mind because they get to questions about equity and creating an equal playing field for people the world over. And this is stuff that I'm really passionate about. And so really, when it comes to communication, if you cannot adequately communicate in writing, that's going to impact your ability scholastically. So these students who are, say, below proficient at high school, they're the ones who aren't going to be getting the scholarships, who aren't going to be doing well in school, and that will impact their educational experience. And then their job prospects. So those students won't be the ones who will be top of the class, getting into law school, getting the great internships, etc. And then if you take it into the workplace context, so let's say, to your example, okay, I'm not proficient, but I can grab my phone and I can send you a text message. But I'm never going to be able to be promoted into managerial positions, into that upper level professionally in my workplace if I'm not able to communicate in writing with those higher ups. So basically at every step, there's a kind of gatekeeper, whether that gatekeeper is an educator or a professional, and writing is the key sort of metric that judges whether, or that is that sort of gate through which you must pass to demonstrate your eligibility for that next level past the gate.
So to respond to your question, I think I might have a slightly different answer. That's essentially a kind of efficiency answer as well, right? But
it's an equity answer. It's an equity answer.
Well, equity and efficiency, But I think the further answer as well is if you look at EssayJack, I think superficially it's a writing tool. But we learn how to think through writing. We only ever really confront our thoughts through writing. So yes, we might be able to send text messages, but if we want to delve into something in any level of depth, nuance, complexity, we have to be able to formulate coherent thoughts. Otherwise, we're open to manipulation. We can't think critically and independently. And that's my broader answer to that question.
Yeah, I'm fully on board. I agree with both of you. I don't want to cause a rift here, but your point about writing to teach yourself, I think if you can't crystallize those thoughts in your own mind, you can't then teach somebody else that. So it's a really important process, isn't it? Just to be able to write, for your own benefit rather than the reader's benefit.
And even too, it makes you a better reader and a better listener. So if you've been able to master the skills of writing, particularly structural skills, so you know the moves happening in an argument, then for instance, when you're confronted with fake news, for example, you'll be able to sort of evaluate more critically what is or isn't worth your time and attention.
Well, let's dive into the solution, because now let's take that into the world of technology. And I want to preface this as well, because I was shown years ago when I started my sort of professional career, somebody shown me a McKinsey document, a McKinsey writing manual. And for years and years, I'd been writing as they had taught me in the world of academia. And then I read this McKinsey doc. I thought, oh my God, this is like really, really good. And it was handwritten, and typed, and then photocopied and like ring bound. And somebody had photocopied it and handed it around. And there was like a structure. And they said, look, if you want to write, you structure it. And they had like their triangles and all the argument triangles. And, they say things like, don't use words like this or it. Be specific about what you wanted.
Did I write that? I've written something
you
like
might
that.
have well written that, but whoever wrote it was a genius.
Oh, thank you.
I take credit for it. So, and I then realized actually there is a structure to writing. Like, I mean, if you go into the world of art or music, there's a science behind the art, isn't there? Like if you write a play or a movie, there's all these courses you can take about structuring these things. So maybe we can dive into your solution, because I feel that you're going to teach us a little bit about structure and how you do this, right? So let's do that. Let's dive into the pitch deck.
Let's see.
I'm going to jump forward a few into the platform. Yeah, so let's talk about the actual platform. How does it work? Let's walk us through. If I'm a student, how would I actually use this?
I'll start the answer, and I'm sure you'll continue with the details. Because I think to explain the philosophy behind EssayJack in a very simple way, good writing is about understanding location, location, location. Every genre of writing involves learning to put information in the correct places, because research shows that readers of the English language have relatively stable expectations about where to find information in a document. And once you know where to put information, you will write a reasonably comprehensible document. So that's where the structuring comes in, the scaffolding comes in.
Yeah. Right, interesting. So you're saying that we're mentally trained to find information in certain places.
Your eyes will scan for information in certain places. And if you don't see it, you won't understand the document.
Put it there, where we're looking for it.
So all we're doing is decoding these locations. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but basically.
Yeah, all right. And just to pick up on that, and then I'll jump in with a little bit more detail in terms of how EssayJack does what we're describing it to do. But to go back to, as you were saying, from the perspective of, say, a marker, a teacher, a professor, so you get these content dumps, but your mind is looking for information in certain places and you're not finding it, and it takes a lot longer for you to kind of forensically go in and try to untangle what you think the student is trying to say.
This may require scotch as well.
And then, but I mean, this is also the case where so say if you're a board of directors of a company and you get reports that come to you, and even if those reports linguistically are correct, so they've been grammar checked and spell checked, but they are a kind of dog's breakfast in terms of the structure, it's very difficult to then find the information that you as a director are looking for. And so that can affect your ability to do the kind of due diligence required at that level. So in both cases, you've got sort of, whether it's a teacher or a boss who's looking for information in a particular place. And so what EssayJack does is there's a lot of sort of pedagogy that goes into why it does what it does and how it does what it does, which, I won't bore you to death with. I'll give you the high points. So one of the high points is what in English language learning context is called chunking. So it's taking bits of English language and chunking it into smaller component parts. And so, for instance, in in speaking, instead of teaching people just to say, hello, you might teach them the chunk, hello, how are you? Right. And then, that's your chunk. And so in writing, it would be, say, we're all familiar with small text boxes. So you have small text boxes, and into that text box goes a chunk. So for instance, in the academic essay, the first chunk is the topic. So instead of, since the dawn of time, man has written about whatever, you actually say, okay, so what's your topic? What are you writing about? Focus it. If you're writing about tech in Asia, have a first sentence that says, this essay is going to explore the growth of tech in Asia, as opposed to, technology is interesting in various parts of the world or whatever, which doesn't have that kind of focus that people are looking for. The second component from a pedagogical perspective, and Ruben's already mentioned this, which is scaffolding. So scaffolding in teaching terms is much like scaffolding in construction terms.
You need it.
You need it.
Which was actually the inspiration for the platform.
You want to go there?
We can, if you like.
Tell us a story, because that's
how the idea came about is my best friend owns a very large scaffolding company. He makes scaffolding from construction, oil and gas, and about 5 years ago, I went to visit his factory. He said, you should come and look at it now. It's no longer a shack, indeed. It's got robots and all these things. And as I was walking around looking at these bits of scaffolding, I thought, why couldn't we just build scaffolding for writing? the connecting parts, which don't really change.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So just like the building, you design a building whatever way you want. The scaffolding is used as a framework for you to put up the building. Then the scaffolding disappears.
And what does that framework do? I mean, let's put it in the context of like building a building. It keeps you in line with where it needs to go, and there's certain physics in there as well, right?
Which
is kind of what
exactly. So it helps you go from sort of, you have the scaffolding, and then you build floor number 1, and then the scaffolding goes up, and you're able to build the second and third. Continue to build, and then the scaffolding gets pulled away, and the building stands there,
Still
and
stands,
it still stands on its own, and it is different. You can use the same scaffolding for building A and building B, but they will look quite different. And so in a writing context, you can have those same connecting bits, that same structure, but it doesn't limit the writer's creativity, the writer's ability to play within that structure and create as you would in buildings.
This is an interesting point,
buildings.
isn't it? Because people often argue, and wrongly, I think, that once you start creating structure, you remove creativity. But if you look at any creative person, whether they're in art, music, or writing, they have a ton of structure.
They
do.
And that's what we don't see. Yeah. It's that base, isn't it, below the ground. It's the what they put into the ground that they built on, which we don't see.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the sort of the myth, isn't there, about creative work.
Creativity is by definition a structured activity.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, and it is, and I think as well, one of the unhelpful myths around creativity, and writing falls prey to this, as do other art forms, but is this myth that like it's just the creative genius and it sort of pops out of your head magically.
It's a flash.
And that's so firstly, that's not the way writers work. Real writers work very, very hard on
like Stephen King.
Yes.
I mean, he gets up in the morning, he writes 2,000 words, does it.
And there's
even if he's not feeling it. Right?
And there's a framework, and it is real work. It's not just sort of magic genius. And so when we tell students, or when students are led to believe that there's some sort of magic genius that happens outside of them, it's very disempowering. You feel like there's nothing you can do. And I'm of the firm belief that with respect to all art forms, all of us, if we put in the time, we can be proficient. We may not then take it to the next level. That may be something that is ineffable. Maybe I don't have what it takes to be Picasso, but I can probably learn how to be a pretty good painter if I get the structure right. And so similarly, I'm very confident that I can teach anybody to be a proficient writer. Then it's up to them whether it really sparks and they sort of take it and run with it. But I had said there were 3 pedagogical things, and I did 2, and so I don't want to leave people hanging, because this is one of those things that
the structure's working there.
This is my OCD. So the third part is, and again in teaching, this is interrogative methodology is the sort of formal language, but put simply, it's just focus questions. So as you are writing, if you're just kind of answering questions like, oh, what's your topic? Oh, is there any background we need to know? Okay, what's the point that you're going to argue? And so you merely ask students questions. And so in an old school classroom, that would be sort of Socratic methodology teaching. I get up and I ask you questions, and you answer, and we collectively create knowledge. And so we've replicated that digitally. And so those are the kind of 3, and as I say, there are other things at play, but those are the sort of really 3 value adds from a pedagogical perspective going on in EssayJack.
I think just to sort of maybe make the point in a slightly simpler way, I'm not the pedagogical expert, I'm just a lowly professor of law, but one of the biggest reasons for poor writing is people forget that they write for an audience. And that's very easy to forget when you stare at a blank Microsoft Word page. But with EssayJack, what we've done is try to put the audience front and center. So the 3 component parts. The focus question is a question that's posed by the reader. Then you have transition statements, or sentence starters that are common sentence starters that the reader would expect. And then you have further tips. So the writer is never writing alone. And that's the core idea.
Absolutely. I love it. I want to put this to the test. I mean, we can't actually put this to the test live, so I'm not going to put you on the spot, but you've got some data here as well. If we can flash up the pitch deck.
Sure. I'm
just going to jump through a little bit here. It works.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your tests.
Yeah,
what's the qualitative and quantitative results that come out of this?
So we've done, and there's a whole lot of actual raw data from which we've pulled this. So we did testing in 2014, 15, 16, 17, and we're running tests now, and they've been all different kinds. So there have been control group tests where we had one group using EssayJack and one group not. And of course, in the class using EssayJack, the grades were higher. We've done tests where it was optional and students could use EssayJack or not, and they sort of chose to. And then we gave them surveys and got feedback, and their grades were higher. And they've reported less writing anxiety and less procrastination. We've had tests where we've given EssayJack to students to use and then just asked them, give us your feedback. And then we've run a linguistic analysis. And on that test, it was 80% of the students, the word that they repeated the most was helpful, that EssayJack was helpful.
Yeah.
So across the board, the kind of three metrics we've been looking at, does it reduce writing anxiety? Does it increase grades? And does it sort of speed up the writing process? So that's the efficiency point. And across the board, the answer to all of that is yes. And that's been whether it was, and all of these tests, aside from this sort of 2014, which was an early prototype, they've all been paid. I mean, we just sort of launched our product in the marketplace and had paying customers, and those paying customers were also our focus groups and our beta testers and everything. And so we've had thousands and thousands of students and teachers providing us with reams of data that really does show that
And
that
soon
EssayJack
we will
works.
have a white paper, no less,
Yes.
to
Great.
set out all of this information.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, okay, there's a couple of things I want to ask you.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about who actually pays
Yeah.
for this. But before I forget, I want to know what you've learned in this process as well, what assumptions you've challenged of your own. But so you say it's paid. Who actually pays for EssayJack? Is it like a white label product, or do individual students pay for it?
So presently we have two sources of revenue, B2C and B2B.
Right.
B2C is subscription based, so individual users or their parents may pay for that on a monthly or annual basis. And then we have a distribution. We have distribution partners, and we have institutions that will pay. They buy licenses.
Right. You've got quite in-depth analysis of that in the pitch deck here. We won't go too much into depth on that, but it's sort of, these would be institutions like education.
So schools, colleges, and universities, and they will buy it as EssayJack. We do have white labeling options. So if university says, okay, University X, we want it, and we want to stick our logo on it.
Yeah,
totally
fine.
doable.
But if it gets better grades for their students, then well, it's a no-brainer, really, isn't it?
Exactly.
With all due respect to the product, but for them, if it helps them get that result, it's just a tool for them as much as giving them access to a library.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, fine. So I want to ask. We'll go into the revenues as well. We'll jump into that in a minute. But the what have you learnt yourselves in this process? Because you've conducted so many tests. From 2014 to 2017, even now 2018. Is there any? I know there's so much that we can go into. Have you sort of like learnt something yourself in the process? We said, we thought it was going to be this, but actually it's that.
Yeah.
In terms of the SOA.
Sure. I thought I'd be on a beach and driving a Ferrari by now, but not so.
Apart from that,
I was going to say, didn't you mention Scotch? Can we get the Scotch going now?
You just love the intellectual challenge, I think, more than that.
Well, we'll see. I may be a masochist. This is true, buddy.
Do you want to jump in with a real answer first?
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm as you've intimated. I mean, there's so many lessons to learn. Lessons about the product, lessons about the business, lessons about yourself, lessons about all of that. So you kind of pick and choose which to talk about on air. But I think so. A couple of things in terms of the product as a business, and so very, very quickly and very easily when we started, everybody we showed it to loved it. So our very first, I think it was like sort of 200 alpha testers, and that was grade 8s, grade 11s, grade 12s, their teachers, administrators, 5 different university classes at the University of Toronto. So all of them, like they all sort of universally loved it. And I think from that we said, we sort of had this very naive, like, well, if we build it, they will come. So we'll just make the best product out there. Yeah. And then because it's awesome, everybody will want it. I mean, as you said, an institution, it makes their students' grades better. It's a no-brainer. That is true, but you have there's a lot of labor involved in telling that story and getting that in front of as many eyeballs as possible. So one of the big lessons is that is costly, sort of getting your amazing product, even if it is the best product and the only one sort of in its space. I mean, we've really reinvented drafting and sort of invented a new product category. There's nothing that's really doing what we're doing. So then that's a weird story to tell. It's an exciting story to tell, but it's one that is sort of costly to get in front of as many eyeballs as
educating
possible.
the market, isn't it? It's tough. Somebody hasn't gone out there and done that for you already, so you're going to have to do that, right?
Well, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ruben.
Yeah, so I think this sort of follows on from your point. I think one major lesson that I've learned, I mean many, but one major lesson is there's a difference between people who could benefit from your product, who could use your product, who may even need your product, and people who will value your product.
Tell me, what do you mean by that?
So there are people who, for instance, struggle with writing, but that doesn't mean they're going to pay for your product. And then there are people who not only struggle with writing, and they will pay for your product. You know, so you have to define your customer profile in a relatively precise way.
Right. So what's the difference between those two categories?
So, for instance, English language learners tend to both find the product very useful and value it, and will pay for it, and will pay quite handsomely for it. And then you have sort of users for whom English is their first language. They still struggle with writing, but they take quite a bit of convincing to come to see that, well, I should actually pay for this.
Well, this goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, like, oh, okay, so I've got a university degree, I know how to write.
Yeah.
And then you bump up against somebody who says, well, actually, maybe you don't. So that's a bit of a hard sell.
They don't know what the problem is themselves, right? They can't see it. Whereas an English language learner is already sort of coming from the outside.
They're very sensitive to that. I think one of the things too, you know, in picking up on this, when you're an educator, you're used to trying to teach all students. So you're used to saying, okay, well, there are some that they're going to want to come along and I can teach them. And then there's going to be that one at the back of the class. And my challenge is to get him or her to come along. Whereas with a business, as Ruben says, you narrow your market niche and you say, okay, so some of them, even though they need it and they should have it, and as a teacher, I would want to help them. As a business owner, you have to say, well, you know what,
it's very different.
They're
isn't
lost,
it?
you know.
You've got a responsibility as a teacher to make sure that everybody gets the opportunity. But in a business, you can't spread all your effort across the market, can you?
You can't. And I think the other piece too, and Ruben sort of alluded to this in terms of the who values it and who needs it, and how that sort of meshes in terms of a business and needing people to pay, because you've got to keep the lights on and pay salaries and things like that. But interestingly, and this is, I think, you know, the digital world in which we live, people expect a lot that is delivered to them digitally to be free. And
very true.
And which was strange to me, because in education, you know, people will buy textbooks, and then you're like, well, this is better than a textbook, and it is, you know, multidisciplinary. You can write as many essays as you want, you know, all of these sorts of things, and that's like, oh, but online it's free, right?
Right.
Well, if you want me to take all your data and sell it, you know.
No, that's complicated to navigate that minefield.
Yeah. But as you said, I mean, it's going back to the point. I mean, we'll look at your revenues in a minute. You're actually making money. So, you know, the point is that there is a group of people who are paying for educational services already. And there's a big group who don't. Or expect it to be given to them free, right? So let's talk about the revenues in terms of where we are now. Let's jump back into the pitch deck. Towards the end, you've got your sort of journey over the last few years. And here we are.
Let's look at this.
Yeah, so slide 31. Revenue growth, customer growth. So how many customers do you have now?
So we've got about 15,000 customers now. And one of the things that I think is interesting to note here is we sort of think of the last 3 years as basically just being in stealth mode. So we've not spent any money on marketing or on growth. We've really been building a product, testing a product. But of course, we've been doing that in the market, because one of the key things that we took when we first sort of showed people that early prototype, and we showed it to quite a seasoned ed tech provider, and he said, you know, yeah, it's great, it's wonderful, there's nothing in the market like this. And he goes, but your biggest test will be who's going to open their wallet to pay for it. So the sooner you answer that question, the better. And so that's why we sort of opened our pay gateways at the exact same moment that we opened up our beta product to the world. And so what you see on the slide in terms of year-over-year customer growth and revenue growth is that we have been growing very organically through word of mouth and through our own sort of labor and efforts to get it in front of people. It's the hustle. It's
so
the
you say
hustle.
15,000 customers, that paid customers, 15,000?
So some of them are paying. So I would probably say about half of those are paid customers. Some of those might be on a free trial. So we have a 7-day free trial. We also institutionally often will start off the sales process with, say, a 90-day free trial, so that teachers and educators can actually get it in their class and try it out. And
do you advertise? Is it all purely organic and hustle, or do you spend on Facebook ads? Or
So this gets to the interesting fundraising question,
Right, okay.
da-da-da, which
We're
is
setting it up.
Well, let's answer the question first.
Yeah.
I think so. It's we've done some very small, low-level advertising,
Right.
Facebook, a little bit of, but we have not done any systematic digital marketing, which is what we're moving to do. So that's.
I mean, for you, if you, I mean, because you've now got, I mean, if you've got 7,000 paying customers, you've got 15,000 who are in the system.
Yeah.
Revenue-wise, well, obviously that needs to be updated, but and my eyesight's pretty poor from this distance. Maybe
It's
about half a million.
Yeah.
Half a million. Okay, so
which is not bad given where we come from.
exactly. So you know, you have an ongoing concern. If you can work out, for example, if it costs you X, let's say that's $5 to acquire a customer, and each customer's worth $50, then you can see where the scale is going to be.
Yeah.
Can't you?
Exactly.
That's where you start applying your marketing.
And that's really sort of now as we start to do the modeling for a Series A. That's those are the questions we're.
And that's
trying to answer,
exactly the world that we're in right now. So we wanted, really, before going in front of investors, we wanted to validate those assumptions, as opposed to just saying, oh, okay, we're going to assert it's a customer acquisition cost of, you know, throw a dart at the wall, $5 or whatever. We really wanted to then be able to say, okay, in our life, it's actually about, you know, $2.45 is our customer acquisition cost roughly, and we're looking at sort of lifetime value of the customer, you know, and really sort of refine that a little bit more. And we're now sort of in the midst of making sure that we've got those numbers right, so that our philosophy was always try to de-risk this first before going to friends and family investors, because we didn't want to go to our friends and family and be like, hey, invest in our company, and then lose all of our friends and family. And so that was kind of our first
Unfortunately, you can't lose your family. They're always going to be there, even when you've lost their money, right?
I've tried, trust me.
So you've done the friends and family round. That's how you funded it up until now. And now you're going through what you call a Series A. So what's public in terms of what are you publicly talking about how much you're raising, or are you talking about who you're going to be talking to? Is it a strategic investor that you're looking for in EdTech? Or?
So at the level of friends and family, we have some pretty high-powered investors who will help us raise on the Series A. They run funds and things like that, but we are starting to talk to other VCs. We're talking to a good one here, for example. I could tell you how much we'd like to raise, but we're trying to see if we can make the numbers where we'd like to raise about $10 million.
Right.
Basically.
Canadian, US,
USD.
Everything's
US,
in USD.
And we have a vision in terms of the technical play, the artificial intelligence play that we want to develop as well. So far, the platform is fundamentally in the edutech space, but there's some very interesting things we can do with artificial intelligence, and we're trying to build a proof of concept for that. And we think if we're successful, then the valuation that we need to raise this money will not be implausible.
So just so I understand again, talking about the raise, you said 10 million. Obviously, now you're an interesting scale stage where you can just basically plug that in and just drive the whole thing up. Now it's just a case of, right, how many people can we get with this?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Your customers up until now are based where? Are they sort of Canadian or?
So North American, Canada primarily,
right.
But organically we have customers from around the world.
Right, but mostly Canada.
Yeah, so mostly North America, and mostly we've built up our customer base in the B2B space. So we have right now many more customers in institutions, because we can physically go to an institution and be like, hey, let me, come in and show this, and then you get scale. So as an early stage startup, that's a way to get scale on the back of your own labor, your own sweat equity, to be clear. Whereas moving into 2019, as we are really able to refine some of the financials around what a marketing cost, a true B2C digital marketing cost looks like, we can then say, oh, okay, we can scale that B2C, and that's where you really do see not the slow and steady organic growth of the B2B side, but you really open up. Like, I think right now we're at 95% B2B and 5% is B2C, and that's really just been sort of word of mouth. I think
to sort of jump in on this, so the kind of money that we need and sort of market share we'd like to see is not purely theoretical, in the sense that we've got a partnership with the British Council, and that partnership is global. It will take time, but they have 92 million digital users. So potentially they would give us a pathway into that market of English language learners. So it's so we already have that. Now it's to develop the product and to be able to market effectively to this customer base, because the British Council itself has complications with how these different markets might work.
Yeah.
And similarly, we've got distribution partners globally. You know, right before we came here, we were meeting with another regional distributor. And so part of it is we've got distribution partners able to get EssayJack in front of as many schools, colleges, and universities as possible. And then it's like, okay, so now what is the support cost to that? So that, you know, if it's just, you know, a very teeny tiny team on our end, you know, that's obviously not sustainable either.
I think it's interesting though. I mean, you've got the B2B and the B2C, and they both will complement each other long term, I believe. You know, if you can get, for example, I mean, if you could, for example, if you went into the student market in B2C and had 10,000 students in a city using the product, then they went to university, they're going to ask their university tech guy, do you have EssayJack? I use this, am I allowed to use it here? You know, if they can't fulfill that, then that's a strike against that university. It's going to be for them an important part of their process. So you can have the B2B sell there as well. And it goes the other way as well. If you train people to use it inside the university.
Absolutely. Afterwards. I mean, that's like for us, we see these as two very mutually supportive business lines. And so, and as well, from a healthy business model perspective, or again, to use that sort of de-risking. So if you say lose a big client that represents, you know, say a 3-year contract and they decide they don't need EssayJack any longer, but you've got a really robust B2C business going, then you can transfer those students who say used to get access to EssayJack through their institutional license, well, they can just sign up on their own, you know, and so you can sort of balance things out. And then as well, you have the buy-in from the institutions. I mean, I can obviously, as I did earlier in the podcast, I can geek out about writing and teaching, I really.
We haven't talked about Shakespeare yet.
No, I'm trying to behave, but I mean, you know, we
don't have time. It's great as well, and I'm conscious of the time. But there's one thing I wanted to ask you, and now we're here in Asia, and we're in possibly what will be the biggest ed tech market in the world,
and that's why we're here.
And that's why we're here. I mean, you talk about, I mean, the fact that you mentioned foreign language learners learning English as a second language, China as an example. I mean, I saw the statistics, something like 250 million students in China learning English.
So they have the largest population of English language learners in the world.
Right.
They're in China.
Exactly. And they, you know, you see the Chinese, I mean, you see the Chinese families here in Singapore invest in education. It's big. So, you know, you're in the right place, obviously, in terms of opportunity. You know, you've got a good market already in North America. But here,
so just to talk about this, our strategy has been to build first credibility, business and educational credibility. You do that in North America. You get the right stamps, the British Council, Cambridge English, and all of that. You show it's a good product. It produces the results. Then you go to Asia and you make money.
Well, and the other thing too, again, with that credibility, with that credibility piece. I mean, our distribution partner in Canada, Nelson, is one of the oldest education publishers in Canada. It's, I think, 125 years old, something like that. And they, before being our distributor in Canada, did a number of sort of third-party tests, like, okay, this product, EssayJack, is this what we want? And, you know, got that validation. It's used across Canada. So then in Asia, when you're like, okay, this is, you know, tried and tested with a really rigorous education system. And so then, as Ruben says, you know, then it again, can take away some of the risks, some of the questions that you might have in this region.
It's got a credible brand behind it as well. So, you know, Asians like those sort of Western brands, especially in education. It's a symbol of authority for them.
Well, and we also, when we started, we're like, okay, so we don't have any money, but we have a bunch of experience and we have credibility and we have relationship equity and so let's, you know, make a list of our assets before we launch into this. And I mean, I shouldn't say we don't have any money. We put you know, all of the seed money for this comes from our savings, and so we really do believe in this. But it was also that, you know, what are our assets? Our assets are that we actually know what we're talking about, and we can get in front of some of the best universities and best partners and best distributors in the world, so that by the time we are ready to go to mass to market in Asia, for instance, that end user knows what they're getting and can feel confident.
Excellent. Ruben, Lindy, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your journey with EssayJack and, you know, your passion for, you know, building this platform. And you're in a very interesting space, and it's great as well to see, if I can say it, to academics come in here and share their entrepreneurial journey. It's not often seen. No. So professionals don't necessarily step out of the professional world and then go and take these huge risks, especially when you've spent years and years building up your credibility in one space, right? And that's inspiring in itself, right?
Thank you. I mean, you only live once.
Yeah.
So to quote Quincy Jones, you're going to know we came through here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing today. And just before you go, what would be the best way for people to reach out to you? And by the way, it could be partners, it could be potential investors, and also people who want to join your team.
Yeah.
We often find that people watch PitchDeckasia and they say, I love these guys. How do I get on board? Because I believe, in what you're doing, where you're going, it may be somebody from the education space, or maybe somebody else is coming from a different angle. So which would be the best channel to get hold of you?
So all of them are the best, but so Twitter is at EssayJack. I'm also at Dr. Lindy on Twitter. That's the same for Instagram. EssayJack.com. There are various contact forms.
Hello at EssayJack.com.
Hello at EssayJack.com by email. And,
All right. We'll put all the details in the show notes. Thank you so much for today. You've been a lot of fun. And I feel the energy levels have risen today. It's been great. That is Lindy and Ruben from EssayJack. We'll put all the details in the show notes. Wish you all the best with your ongoing endeavor. And please come back as well. I'd love it if you came back in 6 months and shared an update. Because we like to give you an update. It's a journey, right?
Yeah.
6 months, you're going to be in a much more advanced position. You've learned more things. Come and share.
thanks so much, Graham.
Thanks for having us.